What if one signature could seal the fate of 10 people? On February 6, 2025, Chad Antil lifts off in a Cessna from Unalakleet Airport. On paper, everything looks perfect, but in reality, the plane is carrying a hidden 1,000 pounds of extra weight, pulling it down into the icy abyss of Norton Sound. So, why would a professional agree to such a dangerous gamble with the elements? And how did a fateful piece of advice from a controller turn a modern aircraft into a useless piece of metal? We're about to uncover the secret of the flight swallowed by the Arctic fog, and it all starts with the man who was actually at the controls of this doomed flight, from 150 to 1,000 hours, a terrifying discrepancy in his logbook. The difference is colossal. Investigators carefully examine Chad Antil's personnel file. Who was this man behind the controls? The year is 2019. Chad is taking his first steps at the airline. He begins his journey in the hangar, diligently working as a mechanic's assistant. He knows the aircraft inside and out, understands its complex components and systems, but he feels an irresistible pull toward the sky. August of 2020 becomes a real test. Chad's initial flight training is proving to be incredibly difficult. The instructors in the cockpit are frowning. The tension is mounting. His check ride ends in failure. Chad makes a dangerous mistake, violating the minimum altitude on approach. The ground gets terrifyingly close. He is flatly denied his rating. His dream is hanging by a thread. But then, something unexpected happens. The very next day, after this major setback, Chad completely pulls himself together. He gets back behind the controls and successfully passes the test, earning his commercial pilot certificate. Investigators would later highlight this stark contrast in his file. The candidate who was on the verge of being cut is now confidently holding the certificate he so desperately wanted. His further training proceeds right on schedule. Chad regularly attends the Flight Safety International Training Center. He methodically practices procedures, honing his actions to be automatic in the simulator. In October of 2024, the stakes get higher. With the cold season approaching, the pilot completes a specialized course on winter operations for Cessna aircraft. Ice on the wings, snow squalls, poor visibility. He studies the machine's behavior in these harsh conditions in detail. The official paperwork confirms his qualifications and readiness to fly. All his certificates are in perfect order. The paperwork is pristine, but reality is hiding a deadly trap. Investigators open up the internal manuals for the airline, Bering, and they are stunned. The entire weight of decision-making falls squarely on the pilot's shoulders. Chad Antil is completely alone against the encroaching storm. The company simply doesn't have a dedicated dispatcher who carefully monitors weather conditions along the route and gives the green light. The pilot is required to gather, filter, and analyze complex meteorological information all by himself before every single flight. He is his own forecaster, his own stern controller, and the sole commander. But meticulous journalists digging deeper into the company's history uncover a much darker picture. A systemic practice known as the normalization of deviance is deeply and firmly rooted in Bering Air's corporate culture. Behind this dry term lies a dangerous routine, shockingly similar to a perilous tightrope walk over an abyss. Dangerous violations become completely routine, like a normal cup of coffee before a flight. This is directly reflected in the regular, almost constant, exceeding of the maximum takeoff weight for their commercial aircraft. The planes are operating at the absolute limit of their physical and aerodynamic capabilities. How do the pilots manage to so easily bypass the strict documentary controls? The answer stuns experienced investigators with its sheer audacity. The aviators intentionally and systematically underreport the weight of the fuel in their official paperwork. On the printed form, the plane is light, maneuverable, and fully ready for a safe takeoff. But in harsh reality, the Steelbird groans under the strain of an extreme, hidden overload. Eyewitnesses from the flight crew now nervously look away during long interviews with inspectors. They quietly confirm the frightening fact. Chad Antil was fully aware of the scale of the threat. He had previously, on multiple occasions and very emotionally, complained to his colleagues about being forced to fly dangerously overloaded planes. Imagine that suffocating despair. You know for a fact the aircraft is heavier than it should be, that every extra pound is mercilessly eating away at your precious chances of survival in even the slightest emergency. But the corporate machine leaves you no choice. Pilots are forced to risk their lives every day to keep their jobs and serve the company's bottom line. The relentless pressure of the soulless business environment proves, time and again, to be dozens of times stronger than the basic human instinct for self-preservation and the unbreakable iron rules of aviation safety. The corrupt corporate system continues to function flawlessly, day after day. The system demands a sacrifice, and an invisible fatigue becomes the flight's most important passenger. Journalists closely examine Chad Antill's packed schedule. On February 4th, 2025, another of his grueling work shifts begins. In the harsh conditions of the North, every flight drains a colossal amount of energy. The day before the fatal flight, the pilot completes a total of 7 separate commercial flights. 7 times he lifts the steel machine into the cold sky and lands it back on frozen runways. His total flight time for the previous day is 4.4 hours. This number seems small only at a first, untrained glance. Experienced investigators know the harsh truth. Behind those dry hours lie constant, lengthy pre-flight preparations, heavy baggage loading and unloading, a constant battle with gusty winds, and the nervous wait for takeoff. The human body is working at the absolute limit of its internal resources. Experts try to piece together an accurate picture of the exhausted pilot's rest. They hopefully open the door to his room at the base in Nome, expecting to find valuable answers. The room is completely empty. Chad's roommate is away on a long trip during this critical period. This simple coincidence turns into a disaster for the official investigation. The one key witness who could have confirmed that Chad got a full, healthy night's sleep is simply not there. Compiling a detailed history of the last 72 hours becomes completely impossible. No one now knows for sure if Chad slept soundly, tossed and turned with anxious thoughts about work, or was up late filling out endless flight paperwork. The clock is ticking, relentlessly counting down the precious minutes, and a key piece of the puzzle is lost forever in the darkness. Investigators are forced to turn back to the dry, official documents. The mandatory sleep survey form has a frightening void. It's completely missing the required information about the crew members' rest times. No entries, no life-saving notes. The system fails at the very moment when every number matters. Accumulated fatigue acts like a dangerous, slow-acting poison, subtly dulling reactions and severely distorting the perception of reality. Chad is left alone with his deeply depleted body. The documents are neatly filed away in the thick case file, but they hide far more than they reveal. The investigation into the pilot's condition hits a dead end, leaving the question of the crew's proper rest unanswered. Pilot fatigue is a terrifying enemy, but in the sky, the machine is what decides everything. Journalists meticulously study the aircraft's technical specifications, trying to find hidden flaws. The flight is being operated on a modern, reliable machine. It's the famous Cessna 208B Grand Caravan EX, a 2020 model. A powerful steel heart beats under its cowling. Engineers installed a turboprop engine that puts out an impressive 867 horsepower. The machine pulls forward with incredible energy, promising complete safety even in the harsh Arctic conditions. But this impressive power comes at a steep price. Investigators focus on the dry numbers in the aircraft's manual. The upgraded configuration makes the plane significantly heavier than the base version. This increased empty weight becomes a hidden trap for the crew. The maximum takeoff weight limit is reached frighteningly fast. Every extra bag, every additional pound of weight, relentlessly pushes the aircraft closer to the critical red line. Now, remember the airline's habit of underreporting weight on paper, and you have a perfect recipe for the coming disaster. The plane is forced to operate on the brink of failure. Rescuers often repeat a cold, hard truth. Ice on the wings breaks the laws of aerodynamics. To combat the harsh elements, the aircraft is equipped with an advanced TKS anti-icing system. It works like an invisible, life-saving shield. A smart mechanism forces a special chemical fluid under pressure through microscopic pores in tiny titanium panels. These panels are located right on the leading edges of the wings. The fluid smoothly spreads over the freezing metal, completely preventing dangerous ice from getting a grip on the smooth surface. However, investigators highlight one critically important detail that changes the entire picture. This advanced protection is extremely demanding. For it to work absolutely correctly, strict parameters must be followed without fail. The pilot must constantly maintain an airspeed of at least 95 knots. Only with such a strong headwind does the protective fluid evenly coat the wing. The moment the airspeed indicator needle treacherously drops below that life-saving mark, the protective barrier instantly collapses. Treacherous ice gets a real chance to instantly encase the heavy, overloaded machine. A pilot is constantly walking a razor's edge, balancing the immense weight of the aircraft against the vital airspeed needed to fly through icy clouds. The slightest miscalculation ends in tragedy. The machine may be perfect, but it blindly obeys the laws of physics, and those are laws that don't forgive carelessness. Investigators with the National Transportation Safety Board carefully lay out the crumpled flight manifests on a table. February 6, 2025. The time is 10:28 in the morning. Flight 8. Echo 445 touches down safely at the snow-covered Unalakleet Airport. The crew immediately begins the routine ground preparations for the next leg of the journey to Nome. The second hand on the clock ticks relentlessly as the fuel gauge needle crawls upward. Ground crew hustle to load bags into the cold cargo hold. According to the documents, the weight of the commercial cargo and baggage is exactly 709 pounds. To any onlookers on the tarmac, it's a completely standard, familiar morning flight. But the plane's tanks continue to greedily swallow jet fuel from the hose. The actual weight of the fuel on board reaches a dangerous 1,464 pounds. The fuel fills the tanks, mercilessly pinning the aircraft to the frozen concrete. Inside the cramped cockpit, Chad Antill picks up a pen and fills out the official weight and balance sheet. Later, investigators would study his hurried handwriting in a blank column with a magnifying glass. The pilot personally enters a fictitious fuel weight, exactly 1,000 pounds. 464 pounds simply vanish on paper with a single quick stroke of his pen. Right here, a corporate culture of deception moves from invisible theory into brutal practice. On paper, the plane is perfectly ready to fly, but the cold, hard physics don't check the paperwork. Aviation experts begin to meticulously add up the real numbers, and the result makes them shudder. The calculated takeoff weight of the aircraft hovers at a critical 9,865, or 9,776 pounds. The figures differ slightly due to the investigators' different calculation methods, but the conclusion remains catastrophic. The actual weight of the overloaded aircraft exceeds the strict legal limit for severe icing conditions by almost an entire 1,000 pounds. The investigators exchange silent glances, understanding the gravity of this monstrous error. The aircraft is rapidly turning into an incredibly heavy, extremely sluggish metal projectile. The de-icing system on the wing edges requires constant high speed, but the monstrous hidden overload is irresistibly pulling the plane down. The deadly mathematical trap has already snapped shut, long before the wheels even leave the concrete in Unalakleet. The falsified papers are signed with confidence, the door is closed, and the powerful propeller begins to roar to life. The crew is preparing to meet the icy skies of North America with lead weights on their wings. The frozen hell over Norton Sound has already opened its invisible doors. Overloaded beyond all measure, the aircraft departs Unalakleet and heads straight into the storm. The planned route takes it over the open, unwelcoming waters of the massive bay. Below, dark, bitingly cold waves churn furiously, and ahead, a completely impenetrable, solid gray wall awaits the lone pilot. Investigators carefully study the dry weather reports for that fateful day, nervously rubbing their temples. The current weather conditions are officially described as difficult instrument conditions. In the stark language of aviators, this means a complete loss of visual contact with the outside world. The pilot can no longer rely on his own eyes. His life now depends entirely on the dimly flickering instruments on the cramped dashboard. The outside air temperature in the flight zone is dropping rapidly, freezing solid at a critical -10 degrees Celsius. The space outside the aircraft is literally ringing with the piercing Arctic cold. the tiny cockpit quickly becomes a sealed, completely isolated capsule. Horizontal visibility along the route plummets to just half a mile. It's like speeding down a highway with your eyes squeezed shut, trying to guess the right path through a thick, viscous soup. The situation deteriorates with every second of the flight. Meteorologists on the ground record that a true weather trap is forming in the upcoming descent zone. A whitish fog blankets the area, and a fine, stinging snow begins to fall. But nature's most fearsome weapon is hidden between the falling snowflakes. The air is thick with supercooled drizzle. These are tiny water droplets that miraculously remain liquid in the freezing temperatures, but instantly transform into a heavy shell of ice upon the slightest contact with flying metal. With a sense of dread, the NTSB experts open the thick aircraft operating manual. On one of the pages, a stern warning from the engineers is highlighted. Supercooled drizzle is far beyond the official certification limits of this aircraft. The de-icing system simply isn't designed to combat such an aggressive enemy. The plane is flying directly into a deadly zone where its defenses are utterly useless. Every minute spent in this icy slurry adds more weight to the already overloaded airframe. The pilot is caught in a vice. The corporate machine is pushing him forward, while the laws of aerodynamics are refusing to cooperate. Nature does not forgive such compromises. The deadly ice trap is waiting, and the controller hears a perfectly calm voice. The time is 14:36. Investigators listen closely to the preserved radio transmission. A confident call comes into the safe air traffic control center far away in Anchorage. Chad Antill requests official clearance to depart for Nome. He specifically chooses to fly under instrument flight rules. Experienced aviators understand. The pilot is formally acknowledging that it's a total whiteout outside. He is placing his entire trust, his very life, in the gyroscopes and altimeters, forgoing any visual control of his surroundings. The response from the ground is immediate. In a routine tone, the controller gives the green light and clears him to follow the assigned route. The designated cruising altitude is exactly 8,000 feet. Just 1 minute later, at 14:37, the overloaded aircraft taxis with a loud roar onto runway 33 at Unalakleet Airport. Witnesses on the ground hear the strained howl of the powerful turboprop engine. 867 horsepower are straining to drag a hidden 1,000 pounds of excess weight into the air. The wheels lift off the frozen concrete with extreme difficulty. The plane reluctantly, as if fighting back, punches through the bottom layer of clouds and vanishes into the thick gray veil. The ticking clock mercilessly counts off 3 long minutes of blind flight. At 14:40, the radar in Anchorage comes to life. The controller keys his microphone and, in a completely routine manner, informs the pilot of a successful and stable radar contact. A green dot obediently lights up on the bright monitor. For the controller, it's just another routine flight. The cold radar screen can't show the aggressive ice building up on the wings, nor can it see the hidden, falsified load sheets. This false illusion of total control is reassuring to the control center. The people on the ground have no idea what a desperate battle against physics is unfolding high up in the frozen sky. The aircraft continues its agonizing climb through the dense Arctic fog. The hidden, heavy cargo relentlessly pulls the plane down, while the powerful engine stubbornly hauls the craft up to its assigned altitude. Only at 14:49 does this grueling climb finally end. 12 whole minutes of continuous operation at the absolute limit of the machine's design capabilities are behind them. Chad Antill's heavy aircraft successfully reaches the flight level assigned by the controller and settles into a level, horizontal course. The plane is now stable at an altitude of 8,000 feet above the waters of Norton Sound. The flight continues, strictly by the glowing instruments, 8,000 feet of level flight, but an insurmountable obstacle is suddenly looming ahead. Until this moment, the flight has been proceeding in a completely normal, calm manner. The heavy machine confidently slices through the dense, freezing air over the dark waters of Norton Sound, the powerful turboprop engine droning on. Chad Antill methodically monitors the green numbers on his instruments, gradually approaching the airspace controlled by the Nome Center. Experienced investigators note the perfect straight trajectory on the preserved radar recordings. No sharp maneuvers, no alarming deviations from the course, no distress signals from the aircraft. But far below, on the frozen ground, a completely different, tense scene is unfolding. The rugged ground crews at the destination airport are desperately battling the raging Arctic storm. Heavy snowplows roar onto the runway, their huge steel blades scraping away heavy drifts and chipping at a thick, treacherous sheet of ice. Because of this vital, emergency cleanup, the airport manager is forced to take a drastic measure. The single life-saving concrete runway is temporarily, but completely, closed to all incoming aircraft. The airport puts a hard stop on arriving flights. The cold airwaves suddenly crackle with an important message. An air traffic controller, in a calm, routine voice, relays the new information about the runway closure directly into the cramped cockpit of the approaching Cessna. Aviation experts always refer to such abrupt route changes as critical junctures. The perfect initial plan instantly crumbles, demanding an immediate reaction and adaptation from the tired pilot. The kerosene in the tanks keeps burning away, and an overloaded metal plane can't just stop and hover in midair. An invisible, loudly ticking stopwatch starts, counting down the minutes of an anxious wait. The pilot's response is swift and professional. In a short radio call back, Chad clearly informs the controller of his intention to enter a standard holding pattern. It's a textbook maneuver, a safe procedure practiced hundreds of times in ground simulators. An aerial holding pattern works like a giant, invisible carousel in the sky. It allows the aircraft to safely circle at a strictly defined altitude, patiently waiting for the heavy snowplows on the ground to finish their work. The ground controller's radar screens clearly register this new flight plan. The heavy, overloaded machine obediently banks into a long, smooth turn, preparing to circle endlessly in the dense, icy fog until the runway is clear. Chad Antill is putting the plane into a forced hold, strictly following established procedures. But suddenly, the safe aerial carousel is canceled. Fatal advice crackles through the headphones. Instead of the life-saving hold, the controller suggests a completely different, seemingly simple scenario. The radio comes alive again. The air traffic controller, in a calm, almost routine tone, voices an alternative course of action. He friendly suggests the crew slow down a bit, while still in their current cruise flight. The logic on the ground is crystal clear. This simple maneuver would elegantly prevent them from arriving prematurely at the completely closed airfield. The plane would simply arrive just as the snowplows were finishing up, saving precious fuel that would have been spent circling. Investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board clench their fists as they listen to this short audio recording over and over. The flight controls have no hard, strict limits on the rate of speed reduction. To the specialist sitting in a warm, safe control tower, Chad Antill's heavy aircraft is just an abstract, glowing radar blip on a dark screen, slowly crawling towards its target. The man at the console physically cannot see the aggressive ice forming on the plane. He is completely unaware of the strict, life-or-death operational limits of this specific overloaded Cessna. The ground has no idea that the de-icing system is critically dependent on a powerful blast of oncoming air. Reducing thrust in these extreme weather conditions is like voluntarily switching off your only shield. The invisible hands of the clock move forward, relentlessly marking off the last few calm minutes of the flight. In the narrow, fatal window between 3:10 and 3:15 p.m., an irreversible action takes place. Over the radio, the pilot's voice is steady, professional, and completely devoid of emotion as he confirms the new instructions from the ground. Chad Antill abandons his initial, reliable plan to safely enter the holding pattern. He makes the firm decision to reduce his aircraft's airspeed, obediently following the controller's recommendation. The experienced pilot's hand smoothly pulls the engine's thrust lever back. The RPM of the powerful turboprop engine dutifully drops. The strained roar in the cramped cockpit becomes noticeably quieter, calmer. The aircraft begins to artificially slow its pace, right in the epicenter of the ice storm. The steel bird obediently adjusts to the snow removal schedule on the distant runway, irrevocably losing its aerodynamic advantages. The plane continues toward its destination, smoothly but surely bleeding kinetic energy in the middle of a vast, dense, whitish fog. The thrust lever slides back, silently inviting disaster to come aboard. Chad Antill obediently reduces the thrust of the powerful turboprop engine, intentionally initiating a significant drop in airspeed amidst the dense, whitish fog. The time is exactly 3:16 p.m. The air traffic control radar systems dispassionately record the steady descent of the small green blip on their large monitors. The altitude is exactly 5,300 feet above the icy waves of the bay. The radio is completely silent, but inside the cramped cockpit, an invisible battle against the brutal laws of physics is unfolding. Journalists would later call this short minute the true point of no return. The needle on the airspeed indicator treacherously creeps to the left, hovering over the most terrifying values. The indicated airspeed of the heavy commercial aircraft plummets below a vital threshold. The critical operational minimum of 95 knots has been passed forever. The engineers know the harsh truth. It's at this very moment that the advanced titanium de-icing protection completely fails to save the aircraft. The life-saving chemical fluid no longer coats the metal in an even layer because the force of the oncoming air is now too weak for it to be distributed properly. Investigators carefully study the basic laws of aerodynamics, analyzing the pilot's actions. The aircraft is in a state of monstrous, deeply hidden weight overload. A fictitious extra 1,000 pounds is pulling the frozen structure down with irresistible force. To keep this lumbering mass airborne at such a frighteningly low speed, the pilot needs to generate additional lift immediately. Chad is forced to physically pull the yoke back, pitching the nose of the plane high up towards the approaching clouds. Experts call this complex maneuver a significant increase in the angle of attack. The machine is now flying in a highly unnatural way, leaning heavily on the oncoming airflow with its entire underbelly, like a very tired swimmer trying to stay afloat with his last ounce of strength. This steep pitch immediately triggers a fatal chain reaction on the surface of the metal. Because of the high angle of attack, the oncoming wind drastically changes its usual path of flow. It no longer hits the front of the wing head-on, as the clever designers at the factory had intended. The crucial aerodynamic point where the cold airflow stagnates physically shifts far down, deep below the very bottom edge. The smooth profile exposes its most vulnerable, completely unprotected area to the harsh elements. The icy drizzle from the fog instantly finds a perfect bare surface for hard contact, as the plane continues its perilous flight over the bay. The smart rescue system is working flawlessly, but it's only protecting the empty sky. The National Transportation Safety Board investigators lean over the Cessna's blueprints, trying to fully grasp the scale of this technical paradox. The pumps of the advanced de-icing system are not giving up. They continue to function properly, with methodical and cold precision, pushing the viscous chemical fluid through the barely visible holes in the titanium. Deep inside the wing, the electronics are conscientiously performing their original task without a single failure. But because of the heavy aircraft's high nose-up attitude, the physics of the oncoming airflow have changed beyond recognition. The powerful headwind catches the extruded fluid and mercilessly blows it exclusively over the top of the wing. The precious life-saving agent just slides uselessly across the upper aluminum surface and dissolves forever into the dense gray fog behind the aircraft. At this fateful moment, the lower surface of the overloaded aircraft's wing is left completely naked against the advancing ice storm. Not a single drop of protection on the vulnerable metal. Aviation experts shudder, calling these specific conditions a perfect trap for any airframe. Large, abnormally heavy droplets of treacherous supercooled drizzle slam into the metal profile at high speed. They strike with precision, far beyond and below the narrow safe zone that the porous plates are meant to protect. An irreversible collision between the elements and technology is happening. On the smooth metal, an ultra-fast, almost instantaneous formation of thick ice begins. The water from the fog freezes in the same fraction of a second it touches the frigid, cold aluminum. An aggressive white shell rapidly engulfs the lower edge of the wings, and the thick external metal struts, critical structural elements that securely connect the wing to the fuselage. The invisible stopwatch relentlessly counts down the short moments as the plane is visibly encased in a deadly heavy crust. Journalists poring over the meteorological reports in detail are frozen by the terrifying speed of this natural anomaly. The massive ice formations that have grown don't just add hundreds of pounds of unplanned weight to an already critically overloaded machine. They do something far more destructive. These coarse, asymmetrical, shapeless chunks begin to physically deform the carefully engineered aerodynamic profile of the airframe. The perfectly smooth wing, specially designed to slice gracefully through cold air, is rapidly turning into a rough, ugly, lumpy stump. The airflow separates from the icy spikes, completely destroying the lift. The aircraft definitively loses its ability to hold itself steady in the Arctic sky. The ice spikes on the wings become a deadly, insurmountable drag chute. The grotesque deformation of the once perfect profile has an immediate, catastrophic effect. The head-on resistance of the heavy machine increases several times over. The air that is supposed to gently hold the Cessna up now becomes a thick, dense, and utterly impenetrable wall. The investigators look on with growing horror at the recovered telemetry graphs. The engine is running smoothly, the powerful turbine is spinning. But the monstrous drag has grown so immense, it completely overpowers the meager thrust the engine can produce at these low RPMs. Chad Antill had obediently throttled back on the controller's fatal advice. And now, he simply doesn't have the critical power reserve to punch through this invisible, icy barrier. The laws of aerodynamics are about to deliver their final, utterly ruthless verdict. The heavy aircraft completely loses its life-saving lift. The airflow brutally separates from the iced-over wings, and the multi-ton machine plummets into an uncontrollable nosedive. It's the beginning of a terrifying aerodynamic stall. The plane is no longer flying. It's just a piece of rapidly falling metal, lost in the thick Arctic fog. Back in air traffic control, a ticking clock marks off the most terrifying seconds imaginable. Controllers listen intently to the cold static of the radio, desperate to hear a single cry for help. But from the cockpit of the falling aircraft, there is nothing but silence. Chad Antill isn't pressing the microphone button. He isn't transmitting any emergency distress calls. Journalists and experts would later theorize that the pilot was fighting the heavy, unresponsive yoke until the very last, fatal moment, desperately trying to pull the overloaded, ice-caked machine out of its death spiral. He simply didn't have a spare second for a conversation with the ground. Ground-based radar systems impassively record the unfolding tragedy in real time. The green dot on the massive monitor, which just a minute ago was calmly crawling toward its destination, suddenly begins to lose altitude at an alarming rate. The numbers on the glowing screen plummet, showing an inevitable, rapid descent toward the cold, dark waters of Norton Sound. The radar operators can only watch, completely helpless, as the cold mathematics of an inevitable disaster play out. Around 1518, the inevitable happens. The radar signature for flight 8 Echo 445 flickers one last time and vanishes from the controller's screens forever. Over the ocean, an absolute, endlessly long silence descends within the dense white fog. The controller's screens go dark as the final act of this drama unfolds over the sound. The heavy machine finally loses its uneven battle with the laws of physics. The aerodynamic stall quickly transitions into a vertical, completely uncontrolled plunge. The overloaded metal, locked in a thick, aggressive shell of ice, hurtles downward like a stone through the dense Arctic fog. At 1520, the life-saving space between the gray sky and the Earth disappears completely. The aircraft, at immense speed, collides hard with the frozen ice sheet of the harsh Norton Sound. The impact of colossal destructive force sends a dull shockwave across the white, frozen wasteland, throwing up a cloud of snow and ice. It's in this brief fraction of a second that the onboard electronics attempt a miracle. The smart technology is programmed to save lives, even after the worst-case scenario. The powerful impact with the hard ice surface properly activates the aircraft's automatic emergency locator beacon. Inside the mangled fuselage, a reliable, self-contained transmitter instantly awakens, ready to scream for help to the entire world. National Transportation Safety Board investigators would later note this bright glimmer of hope in their dry reports. The device is working perfectly. It begins actively generating a vital radio signal for the satellites above. But harsh reality delivers its final, crushing blow to any chance of a swift rescue. The moment of impact with the ice causes a catastrophic structural deformation of the Cessna's entire fuselage. The crumpled cold metal acts like a merciless press. The thin coaxial cable, which directly connects the life-saving internal beacon to the external transmitting antenna on the roof, is instantly severed. The lifeline is cut forever, turning the electronics into a useless piece of plastic. Experts at the search and rescue services can only clench their fists in frustration, staring intently at the blank monitors of the global Cospas-SARSAT satellite system. Because of this tiny yet fatal technical break, the distress signal being generated simply cannot escape the confines of the shattered cockpit. It remains trapped forever inside the cramped metal prison, never reaching high into space. On the orbital satellites, there is an absolute, frightening silence. Rescuers on the mainland are on full alert. Their crews have been in their vehicles for a while, but they are completely blind. The lack of a signal deprives them of the precise coordinates of the crash site. There isn't a single red dot on the vast electronic maps of the Sound. The rapid response team simply doesn't know where to send the helicopters in this endless, impenetrable white void. The sky is silent, and on the ground, the most terrible race against time begins. At 1600 hours, the Regional Department of Public Safety receives an official and deeply unsettling notification. A passenger flight has vanished without a trace in the Arctic fog. Rescuers immediately scramble all available resources, hastily warming up the engines of heavy search helicopters. But where are the experienced pilots supposed to fly when precise satellite coordinates simply don't exist because of a severed beacon cable? The on-duty crews peer out through the frosted cockpit blisters into a lifeless white desert. Finally, thanks to incredibly complex mathematical calculations by the air traffic controllers, an approximate crash location is determined. It's far out over the harsh, open water, a long 12 miles from the safety of the solid coastline. And here, a cruel, completely unexpected blow from the elements awaits the professional search teams. The mangled metal wreckage of the fuselage isn't lying on stable, rocky ground. It's resting on a massive, incredibly treacherous floating ice floe. This fragile, frozen platform is not stationary. It's acting like a giant natural raft, continuously and relentlessly drifting out into the open, cold sea at a frightening speed of 5 miles every single day. The crash site is literally, physically, floating away from the rescue teams, dissolving without a trace into the endless ocean. Local meteorologists bring more bad news, turning the outlook from grim to desperate. A powerful, incredibly dangerous winter storm is roaring directly toward the search area. Barometers are plummeting, and the sky is blackening before their eyes. The rescue teams are now caught in the most critical, exhausting race against time. The instability of the thin sea ice threatens to break apart at any moment, swallowing all the crucial evidence and hiding the solution to the tragedy forever beneath the dark, icy water. The northern wilderness fiercely guards its secrets, physically denying the living access to the shattered machine. The severe weather conditions dictate their own ruthless rules, completely halting all rescue flights. Only after 3 long, incredibly grueling days of waiting does the difficult operation finally come to a logical conclusion. Through the subsiding, biting storm, ground specialists safely reach the drifting white platform. The remains of 10 deceased individuals are officially discovered among the twisted aircraft aluminum and are carefully recovered for transport to the mainland. The icy wilderness reluctantly gives up its grim toll. The frozen desert reluctantly yields its secrets to the exhausted search parties. The helicopters finally shut down their powerful engines, and investigators step cautiously onto the treacherously cracking surface of the Sound. A chilling scene unfolds before them. The debris of the crashed plane is scattered chaotically across the deeply fractured, unstable sea ice. The mangled metal of the Cessna looks like a dark, alien stain against the backdrop of the endless Arctic whiteness. Under the heavy boots of the team, the frozen saltwater cracks with a low, threatening groan, a constant reminder of the precarious situation they are all in. There's no time for long deliberations. The experts from the National Transportation Safety Board immediately pull out their professional cameras. They don't just glance over the crash site. They meticulously document every single detail for their future report. The specialists lean in close, taking detailed macro shots of the surviving tail section. It is here that their lenses reveal a terrible visual truth, one that definitively and irrevocably confirms all the experts' earlier suspicions. The photographed elements of the airframe clearly document massive, incredibly dense deposits of aggressive ice. These coarse, heavy buildups completely deform the aircraft's perfect factory contours, turning once smooth lines into ugly, shapeless mounds. The cold element has left its deadly physical signature right on the frozen aircraft aluminum. The rescue team carefully moves deeper into the pile of deformed parts. Investigators examine the aircraft's shattered electronic guts and make a crucial technical discovery. They see with their own eyes the true cause of that terrifying radio silence. Amidst the crumpled metal, they find the very same severed coaxial cable from the automatic emergency beacon. The thin, vital thread was brutally sheared by the crushed fuselage at the moment of impact. The engineers decide to conduct a demonstration, right there in the piercing, freezing wind. They carefully retrieve the intact beacon unit from under the icy debris. To this small device, lying right on the cracked ice, the specialists carefully attach a simple, portable handheld antenna. A flip of a switch brings it to life on backup power. Instantly, without a millisecond of delay, the device blasts out an incredibly powerful distress signal. That piercing, invisible radio pulse is instantly picked up by the portable scanners of the stunned rescue crews. The smart electronics are perfectly functional, ready to send out a continuous distress call. But it's catastrophically missing just one single intact wire to punch through the fog and reach the satellites in orbit. The equipment is working perfectly, but the brutal physics of the impact have cut the aircraft off from the outside world, forever. There's a hard and fast rule in aviation. Dead machines always talk, but this shattered Cessna remains eerily, terrifyingly silent. Journalists are stunned to learn a truly astonishing fact. It turns out that light-engine commercial aircraft of this compact class aren't required to carry armored flight data and cockpit voice recorders. Those familiar orange boxes, the ones that hold all the secrets of a crash, simply aren't on board. The law allows airlines to cut major costs on this crucial equipment. Investigators can only throw up their hands in despair, faced with this gaping blind spot. The absence of an audio recording from the cramped cockpit forever conceals the most critical detail of those final, terrifying seconds of the flight. No expert will ever know for sure if the sharp, auditory stall warning ever went off. Did Chad Antill hear that piercing, life-saving alarm of impending disaster? Or did the frozen automated systems remain treacherously silent in the thick fog? This critical question will forever remain unanswered, giving rise to a host of troubling doubts. Meanwhile, in a brightly lit test hangar, thousands of miles from the frozen Arctic ice, a painstaking and intense laboratory procedure is unfolding. Engineers from the National Transportation Safety Board have carefully brought the surviving sections of the mangled wings here, along with elements of that very same advanced TKS de-icing system. The experts are determined to get to the absolute technical truth and completely rule out any possible manufacturing defect. Specialists carefully hook up complex test rigs. They begin pumping a special chemical de-icing fluid directly into the intake lines of the salvage system under powerful operating pressure. The seconds of tense waiting stretch on for an eternity under the monotonous hum of the pumps. And then, a clear technical miracle happens. The viscous fluid begins to seep out, steadily, perfectly evenly, and continuously, through the ultra-fine metal mesh. The smooth metal is instantly coated in an even layer of life-saving, protective moisture. This direct laboratory experiment finally puts all the scattered pieces of the puzzle into place. The visual test provides undeniable proof that the complex equipment was in perfect mechanical working order right up to the moment of the violent crash. The hardware is in ideal condition, faithfully performing its primary protective function. The mechanisms and hydraulic pumps didn't fail the exhausted pilot for a single second. The core problem lies exclusively in a flagrant violation of the basic laws of physics, caused by a dangerous weight overload and a critically low airspeed. The smart machine was desperately trying to save its occupants, but it was put into an aerodynamically impossible situation from the very start. The official investigation now has 100% irrefutable technical evidence in its hands. The paper trail doesn't burn in the ice. It becomes the prosecution's star witness. The investigative commission's experts confiscate huge boxes of internal flight documentation from the airline, Bering Air. A massive, grueling paper-based excavation begins in quiet offices. Journalists watch in utter amazement as the hidden scale of the day-to-day corporate lies is dragged into the light. A mass audit of the official logs reveals a number so shocking, it's hard for professionals to believe. A staggering 44% of all the company's commercial flights were regularly flown with a gross takeoff weight violation. Nearly 1 out of every 2 of their steel birds was lifting into the cold sky significantly heavier than the strict, mandated limit. This is a true, silent epidemic of deceit. Through meticulous office-based investigation, the experts uncover a systemic, deeply ingrained practice. Flight crews were consistently and knowingly underreporting the actual weight of the fuel on board in their official documents. Time and time again, pilots were personally penciling in pretty but completely false numbers to bypass safety checks and get their cargo out on time. A handwriting analysis puts the final, most painful nail in the coffin of the convoluted case of Flight 8E445. Specialists irrefutably confirm that the weight and balance sheet was personally falsified. Chad Antill's own hand signed his own death warrant. On the day of the fatal flight, the deceased pilot personally understated the fuel weight on the official form. Instead of the actual 1,464 pounds of jet fuel, he confidently and habitually wrote down exactly 1,000 pounds. Nearly 500 pounds of hidden dead weight were added to the Cessna's airframe with a single swift stroke of a ballpoint pen. Investigators are floored by this blatant, utterly illogical contradiction. These dry, paper-based actions directly contradict everything the captain had said before. Chad had previously, and very emotionally, complained to his colleagues at the base about this dangerous practice of constant overloading. As a professional, he perfectly understood the full scale of the daily, looming threat. He was genuinely outraged by this corrupt system. Yet, at the decisive moment that morning, he himself became its obedient, silent enforcer. The pressure of the harsh corporate environment once again proved to be much stronger than the basic human instinct for self-preservation and ironclad flight regulations. The tragedy is mathematically engineered long before the powerful turboprop engine ever spools up, right there on a thin sheet of an official form in a cold cockpit. The documents completely expose the hidden mechanism that created this disaster while it was still on the ground. The cold numbers tell a tragic story that no one is left to confirm in person. 10 lives cut short force the corporate machine to slam on the brakes. The management of Bering Air is in a state of profound shock. The managers don't dare wait for the official publication of the final report from the stern investigators of the National Transportation Safety Board. The realization of their guilt hits them like a physical blow, forcing them to act immediately. The corporate flight operations manual is immediately updated with the strictest, most uncompromising procedures for calculating takeoff weight. The era of blind trust and dangerous paperwork manipulation ends today, giving way to total oversight. The ground control service sheds its old skin. Now, dispatchers and pilots look at the glowing screens of a brand new digital tool. This innovative program was created specifically for the crystal-clear dispatch of every single commercial flight. Bypassing the electronic system is no longer possible, no matter how much one might want to. The smart computer coldly and dispassionately counts every pound of passenger luggage and every drop of jet fuel poured into the tanks. An impenetrable digital firewall now permanently blocks any overloaded aircraft from taking off. That same flawed human factor, regularly multiplied by the thirst for corporate profit, is ruthlessly removed from the fundamental equation of flight safety. Journalists note with satisfaction other, no less important, tectonic shifts within the company's leadership. The company drastically tightens the basic rules for conducting daily flights. If the weather conditions outside deviate even slightly from the strict limits of the aircraft's official technical certification, the flight is immediately and irrevocably canceled. There are no more dangerous compromises with thick icy fog and treacherous supercooled drizzle. Pilots are given the legal right to say a firm no to bad weather. But the hardest, most incredibly painful lesson is learned in the dim light of closed training centers. Instructors fully integrate brand new simulation scenarios into the standard training program. The simulator's electronic brains replicate the real physical parameters of that very same emergency flight down to the smallest aerodynamic detail. Flight crews now sit in the simulator's cramped cockpit, sweating nervously and gripping the unresponsive yoke with all their might, reliving that fateful flight over the cold waters of the bay. The airline officially mandates that every single captain must regularly and thoroughly practice these extreme icing scenarios. Without confidently and successfully passing this incredibly difficult exam, a pilot is simply not permitted to take their mandatory annual check rides. Modern aviators are learning to survive where the old system had its most fatal failure. This bitter experience has forever changed the strict standards of northern aviation, finally closing this dramatic chapter.